Welcome to SumZero. Today we're here with Mark Buckley and Augie Hong from Three North Capital. This is going to be a super interesting discussion. We don't normally have kind of biotech, medtech discussions on SumZero, at least in these webinars. I think this might be our first one, and so this should be, I think, really fascinating. Quickly on Mark. He used to be was previously spent a decade as a general partner at Discovery Equity Partners, a $350 million event-driven activist fund focused on public small caps. And he's got a great track record of outperforming, the S&P and the Russell. He also worked as a senior analyst at David Capital Partners, a long-short fund focused on U.S. and developed markets. And is a fellow Kellogg grad, which is pretty awesome. And then Augie Hong spent 9 years as a principal at Riverwood Capital, a leading growth stage private equity firm focused on technology companies around the world. So yeah, I mean, both of these guys have a ton of experience. Mark, do you want to maybe start off by just giving kind of a little bit of information on just your firm and kind of the investment philosophy of the firm, and then we can obviously dive into to AxoGen, kind of afterwards.
Yeah, let me start real briefly, and then I'll throw it over to Augie, and he can share. So, Augie and I are co-founders and partners of Three North Capital. Our relationship goes back to living on the Three North wing of Allen Hall at the University of Illinois, and so we lived kind of parallel career paths where we were kind of professional and personal resources for each other throughout the years, and talked a long time about finding the right time and kind of opportunity to rejoin and start something new. And so we launched Three North Capital with personal capital in mid 21, and then started accepting outside capital in mid to late 22. And I'll let Augie kind of cover, our investment strategy and kind of what our approach is to small cap investing.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Mark. And Mark will do most of the talking today just because he is the subject matter expert on AxoGen. I've been, as you saw in my background, a lot of my background is tech investing, but I've learned a ton from Mark because he spent time in the industry as well. Well, thanks for having us. So we'll start with that. It's really a pleasure and honor to be here. Mark and I have been on the SumZero platform for probably about 2 months now, and we've just been, very, very impressed. You guys have done a tremendous job building the platform up. We just think the professionalism of the ideas, of the posters, and the sort of the discourse and the dialogue has been truly impressive.
Well, so thank you, Augie. And I'll have to say, you guys are exactly the kinds of folks that we want on SumZero. And I'll say, having read the write-up, incredibly well written. I mean, I would recommend anyone on this call who hasn't fully read the write-up to actually read it, from start to finish. Just very, very thorough in terms of analyzing the full picture, the products, the valuation story, kind of all of that stuff, catalysts, the regulatory picture. I think it was very clear through the write-up. So thanks for doing that. And we look forward to more of those in the future. So
yeah, we hope to continue to post more ideas along the way. So hopefully this is the first of many discussions we can have.
And I'll also add that the write-up on AxoGen won our second or Q2 community prize. So for anyone listening, if you're a potential SumZero contributor, we've basically turned the platform into a 24/7 idea contest, and we let the best write-ups sort of surface and float to the top, and there's obviously cash compensation for folks who win those contests. So congratulations to you guys on winning that prize. So why don't we start with Mark on the, how did AxoGen hit your screen? Like what attracted you to it in the first place?
Yeah, no, great question. And so when Augie and I launched, we did, fairly thorough kind of screening process. And, our goal is, to kind of look and candidly assign a grade to almost every small cap company that kind of fits, our industries and kind of our criteria. And just real quickly on, our strategies, we're running a concentrated portfolio of 15 small cap names. We're long only. We take a 2 to 3 outlook, which is kind of continuous at a time. It doesn't expire at the end of 3 years. But just knowing that trying to pick quarters for a lot of these small cap companies is just too difficult, and trying to wait for a catalyst 10 years down the road is way too long. And so, we really like what we call our, kind of underfollowed, misunderstood, and therefore undervalued niche leaders. And so we're doing a bunch of like kind of bottoms up fundamental analysis to try to find these. And then the other kind of really important part of our strategy is we realize that, for all the reasons you can find inefficiently priced small caps, they can stay that way for a really long time. So kind of from a top-down perspective, we spend a lot of time and effort focusing on what we call strategic value of our portfolio companies. And so we really like finding these names and these companies that participate in consolidating industries or have other kind of proprietary tells that we've developed over time that they might pursue a change of control event. Because we just think, again, you didn't touch on it in our bios and backgrounds, but both Augie and I spent time in the M&A groups at 2 different investment banks. And so we can see, and then I worked 3 years at a publicly traded med device firm. And so saw it from the buy side of buying some companies. And then roughly a year after I left, the company was acquired by another strategic. And so certainly understand that, some sort of strategic or even private equity exit is, on a risk-adjusted, time-adjusted basis, a really viable path for maximizing shareholder value for small caps. So, again, we try to screen almost every single med device, software, payment processor, restaurant, aerospace and defense, and a whole kind of bunch of other industries. And we try to grade every single company within those universes. We don't touch energy. We don't touch real estate. We don't do pharma or biotech. Med devices is healthcare as we get. And so it was a combination of like doing a screen of the med device universe, of the companies that were in our size, understanding valuation. And then there happened to also be a venture capitalist that I knew from my past life that was on the cap table, the ownership table. And, they'd done really good work. I'd had some good interactions with them in the past. So that was kind of a little bit of a validation there as well. So that's initially how we found it. And then just started digging in and doing a lot more work, consuming everything we could from kind of a public standpoint. And then starting to talk to both, our, inside resources at the company, management, IR, and then external channel checks with people we knew.
Was that VC investing in the company before it was public?
Yes.
Oh, so very long-term holder there.
Yeah, and then so then through kind of my network and channel checks, and actually to give a nod to Kellogg through a friend of mine who's another Kellogg alum, he put me in touch with one of the seed VC firms. And so the individual I talked to there was no longer at that VC firm, but she was there at the time that they had invested in, I want to say like 06, 07. And so could really talk to me about kind of the early days and kind of, whether or not the technology was viable and, some of the challenges that they'd seen in kind of some of the early years. And so to really give me a really good base of understanding of the company.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is obviously a niche product, nerve grafts.
Yep.
And, would love to hear kind of what that is and what sort of maybe like conditions and injuries their product even applies to. So just tell us about the business, the actual product, what need they service.
Yeah. So they're a med device firm that's focused on the surgical repairs of peripheral nerves. So when you think about peripheral nerves, it's, the things that kind of help you, wiggle your fingers and scratch your face and stuff like that. And, the hug of a child, all these nerves, peripheral nerves kind of run throughout your body, not in the central nervous system, but everything outside of there. And so, sensory function, movement function, all that stuff is really important, and, derives that stuff from your peripheral nerve system. And so, their largest, they do a lot of what I would say is like trauma in the extremities. So if you, and I wrote the example in the letter. I was actually on a guy's ski trip, and we were cooking dinner in the kitchen at the end of the day, and I sliced my thumb open and had to go to the ER, and I lost feeling in my thumb for probably 2 months. So like, accidents like that, car accidents are certainly, big trauma events can impact, your peripheral nerve system where it gets
like burn
transducted.
victims, I could imagine being another.
I'm sorry, what was that?
I was going to say burn victims also, I would imagine, would have this problem.
Burn victims, yeah, and then or not surgical victims, but people who have surgery, and like mastectomy is a huge market opportunity for them, and so people, mothers, wives who have to go through this and they lose all sensation, in their breast. It's really disarming, and it's really it's an issue that they have, and so like AxoGen has developed an ability through their peripheral nerve repair to kind of repair those sensations and reinstall them. So, and real quick, the amazing thing about the peripheral nerve system is it does regenerate. So if you, have I did not get, AxoGen's, nerve repair, my nerves regenerated on their own because it wasn't that big of a cut. They can kind of re-find each other and reconnect over time if the gap is small enough. The issue becomes when, you're moving from like probably 5 milliliter gap to a 10 milliliter gap to bigger. It's just too big of a distance in order for them to kind of find each other and reconnect. So what AxoGen has done over the last 20 years is they've developed an approach using nerve sourced from a cadaver, which is very common in kind of the med device industry. I think 80% of ACL repair surgeries use cadaver-based ACLs. And they clean out and the debris of kind of the cadaver while also maintaining kind of all the necessary microarchitecture within the nerve. And then that gets implanted into the patient who needs it. And then over time, the scaffolding approach that they have presented and implanted allows these nerves to kind of regenerate. And because it's human-based tissue, the body kind of adopts it and remolds it into its own. So like the reject rate is like essentially 0. And so it's really kind of taken, this fascinating kind of technology and clean up in order to be able to, help people with this issue.
Was it started by a bunch of like, I could imagine a bunch of like neurologists in a university setting kind of creating something like who are the people who founded this?
So University of Florida, there were some, and then there was also, I think, maybe someone at the University of Texas as well, were kind of the early founders of this technology. And for a long time, AxoGen had an exclusive license on that technology, and they paid, a royalty fee to them, which I think stopped in 2022 or 2023.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, like a lot of science is developed, either by practitioners or by, higher ed kind of people who are doing, cutting edge research. And so that's where it first kind of developed. And then it went kind of through, which I highlighted in the letter, but, it went through a very long and somewhat tortured, I guess, history in terms of just getting to where it is today, and somewhat unusual. And so happy to cover that or go wherever you.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I remember reading was that they're in the sort of $150 to $200 million revenue ballpark.
Yep.
And so, talk a little bit about kind of revenue growth, TAM, where this is heading. I know they have a new CEO. Would love to hear about that as well. I think it's very interesting.
Yeah. And so, yeah, revenue growth has been pretty significant. I think pre-COVID it was growing at like 30 or 40% CAGRs. And you see that a lot with kind of novel med device companies that have found, an efficacious approach that, there is no kind of great standard of care in the industry. And they found that with their allograft approach. Certainly growth really slowed down during COVID, as it did for almost any med device firm. And so, any sort of elective nerve procedure probably got postponed during that time. And it was only like the truly kind of trauma, emergency types that got addressed in 2021 and even 22, because there was nursing shortages that impacted the whole kind of flow through of operating rooms and stuff like that. And so, they've started to kind of get back on their kind of what I would say is what I think is going to be their kind of near to midterm high teen, low 20% growth rate. And so the company and the TAM, the TAM, and this has been an issue in the past. I think there was a short report in 2017 or 2018 who at the time management had estimated there was like a $3 billion TAM. And a short report came out and said they're way overinflating it. The TAM is only 50 million. Well, today, AxoGen's doing $200 million revenue. So they've certainly exceeded, the TAM estimate that was in that short report. Management went back and kind of recertified their estimate of a $3 billion market. The new management team, the new CEO who came in almost a year ago, November of last year, undertook a new exercise, and he's estimated it at around $5 billion. And so, we don't think, and we don't think that it's going to hit $5 billion of revenue, and certainly not in our investment holding period.
But the market cap's like 700 million. So
yeah,
it obviously doesn't need to get to,
Totally. And again, revenue's 220 million. They should get to 220 million this year. And so when you look at TAM, they're low single digit to mid single digit penetration in kind of their core areas, which are extremities, breast resensation, oral, and kind of head and neck. And then they've opened up a new one in kind of prostate surgery. And so, and the CEO would even acknowledge that, like, this TAM is not truly probably achievable TAM today. There's certain things that need to be hit. Doctor awareness, doctor training, better commercial reimbursement coverage and stuff like that. But I'd also point out that, like, it's very rare in med device for anyone to have 100% penetration of a TAM. And so, we think with, the size of the TAM and kind of the penetration rates today, that there's ample room for high teen 20% growth here for the next 2 to 3 to 4 to 5.
And who else is who's competing with them right now?
Yeah, no, great question. So you have to divide the competitors into kind of what I would call short gap and long gap. And so short gap is going to be less than 5 millimeters, call it. And you can do a couple things there is, a surgeon can suture the nerves back together. But you gotta be careful there because that can lead to tension and pulling, which can cause issues in and of itself. There's a few firms that have a synthetic kind of collagen-based hollow tube, and there's some scaffolding in there. But the issue with that, again, you can only use those in really short gaps, and the body never reintegrates that because it's a synthetic product into the body. And so, the study that AxoGen did, which we'll probably talk about later, showed that they had superior kind of efficacy relative to the hollow synthetic tubes. So for the longer gaps, there's really only one solution, and that is cutting open your calf and harvesting nerves from your calf, and then reusing them wherever your injury occurred, whether it's breast, face, hands, feet. And so obviously we can you now have two surgical sites. You have a limited kind of inventory of available nerves. You have a more complicated recovery time, and a more complicated procedure because you have two surgical sites. And all the data has shown over time that it's not a better result. Like the AxoGen approach has similar, if not better, kind of sensory and motor function results over time.
The cadaver approach, where you're not, taking
Yeah.
away from somewhere else or your own body to
Yeah, and there's no one else. There is no one else that is known to be doing a cadaver approach. And so, and even there, I mean, this is a nice kind of competitive moat that AxoGen has, is that if someone came up and obviously they paid licenses and they have, a patent estate of 30 to 50 patents. I can't remember how many there are. A ton of institutional know-how. They've been doing this for 20 years. If someone wanted to enter with a novel allograft approach, they would have to go through the full regulatory process, which is an 8 to 10-year process that AxoGen is on the cusp of just finishing.
And as far as you know, no one else has started that process.
As far as we know, in all of our channel checks and all of our conversations with management, no one else is starting this process. There are competitors, again, for kind of the short gap, the 2 milliliter, the 3 milliliter. But there's no one doing the larger gap repairs. And then again, the nice thing, and I spent a lot of time in the write-up talking about the advanced nerve graft, which is the larger gap. They do have a portfolio of 4 or 5 other products to address the shorter gap ones. And so they can sell more of a portfolio of products, whereas no one else can do that.
And you mentioned they've done 100,000 procedures so far.
Yes. And there's 250 plus peer-reviewed journals. So yeah.
So if you're a doctor and you're presented with a patient with this problem, like they're the only game in town.
Yeah, in terms of a cadaver-based approach. Otherwise, you're getting your calf, cut
Mutilated.
open and getting harvest from there, and then you lose all sensation there. So,
And from a valuation standpoint, you mentioned they trade at 3 times LTM revenues. Is that still roughly true?
no, I mean, and again, I want to echo what Augie said. The power of the SumZero platform has become, very aware to us in the last couple of months. So the stock is up, I think, 40 or 50% since we wrote our write-up. And by the way, the other thing I've done is I track trading volume on a lot of these names. We like to find names that have, relatively low trading volume. The trading volume has tripled in the last several months. And so it certainly has started to hit the radar of a lot of
it's at like 5x revenues now, or 4.5, something like that.
It's right around 4 times. It might be like 4.2 times, something like that, trailing revenue. So
you think it should be at 6?
Yeah, and listen, like trying to pin down, false precision can be kind of tricky at times, but we think, if you look at where peer multiples and candidly, small cap med device valuations have come down over the last several years, higher interest rates, tougher environment, a little bit of kind of post-COVID hangover. And by the way, valuations in med device firms were also hit really hard in the initial phases of what I'll call like the GLP mania, where people thought that Ozempic was going to solve every single med device problem out there. And so you can go back and look at the second half of 23 and the stock price of AxoGen collapsed. It has, unless you're saying you're going to eat less and there's going to be less kitchen accidents, there's like no correlation between.
No correlation. That's incredible.
Yeah.
What about Big Beautiful Bill? Any sort of repercussions there from a just tax policy standpoint that you can think of?
None that we really think of, and if anything, it would be, it's not a major deterrent to kind of think that the kind of the tailwinds that the company has.
Very interesting. So in terms of growth vectors today, I mean, you talk about this being like sort of a mid to high teens grower for the foreseeable future. Um, is there anything new in the pipeline that you see kind of, really pushing that for the long term, or like what's sort of you think, or is it just they sell the same thing? They're so underpenetrated now that there's plenty of room, for the next 10 years for them to keep hitting that kind of.
No, it's a great question. I think there's a couple things, and I'm going to take one step back and get back to kind of the FDA approval. And so just real quick, because again, this was like 10 years of torture for the company, but like when they initially launched their product, they were granted like a human cell and tissue designation. And so when you do those, you have a different regulatory path. And so they were in the market selling. And so I want to say they launched in 2006 or 2007. And then ultimately the FDA came to them in 2015 and said, no, we're changing the regulatory
requirements
that you have to undergo.
Yeah.
And so they had to undergo, so AxoGen then had to undergo essentially a 10-year clinical study, phase 3, level 1 evidence to prove that it was safe and efficacious. And so that's where we are right now. They filed their application last fall of 24, and they had what's called an approval date, which is called a PDUFA date of September 5th. And we can talk about this because this is a big thing that's happened recently. Last week, they announced that there was a 3-month delay in that approval date. So it's been pushed out to December 5th. But we think, there's two things there, is that anyone who applies for a BLA, if they've made it through all the different phases and they get to that step where they're applying, 90% of those get approved. And so it's not like this, long shot or even a binary outcome that a lot of people think about with pharma and biotech. It's once you've reached this stage, and then we talk about which you already hit, like they've done 100,000 nerve grafts. They've been in the market for 15 years. There's a ton of peer-reviewed data, ton of a meta-analysis showing it. And so we think getting the FDA approval is going to be really big for them, primarily because it's going to allow them to expand their commercial reimbursement. So right now they have 90% coverage from Medicare, and they have roughly 50% coverage for commercial payers. And there's 225 million Americans that are on commercial insurance. Some of these insurance companies who have not granted reimbursement have done it because they don't have the final FDA approval, and it's designated as an experimental procedure. Once they get that approval, they will, and it won't be a light switch. It won't be like flipping it on. It'll be more like a dimmer switch of they will when they come up for reviews with these commercial policies, they will slowly but surely add these.
I think, if I could, the one thing I would add is the really unique thing about this investment is that it's very rare that you get to invest in a phase 3 type med device business that already has $200 million of annualized revenue. More likely than not, it's still quite unproven. How they're going to go to market still needs to be built out. The call points need to be built out. This is a very unique situation where not only are they in the 90% bucket that get approved, they already have a product that surgeons know and like and are already in human bodies. So it's pretty unusual it's a pretty unique and unusual situation that you get to step in right now.
And if they don't get the approval, how long would you estimate the delay to be? Any way to kind of bound that?
Yeah, candidly, there's probably a range of outcomes there. The delay that just happened of 3 months was certainly disappointing from our perspective and something that we didn't foresee happening. But I would say, having to go out and do additional clinical work would probably take I would say at a minimum 2 years, year and a half, 2 years, and then anywhere up to 4 to 5. And it just depends on the scope of the ask. And what I would say is like, again, these guys have been in market for a really long time, decade and a half. They've had ongoing dialogue with the FDA throughout this whole recon trial and BLA approval process. You can never say never, but I think it would be very unexpected for there to be any delay that was due to like the data of the study, because it came back pretty conclusive.
What would you say would happen to the stock in a scenario where it gets approved versus a scenario where it doesn't get approved?
So over the short term, I have no clue what happens to stock prices over the short term sometimes. I mean, there's the old adage, buy the rumor, sell the news. Our viewpoint is that if it gets approval, it is a huge, huge tailwind for expanding commercial reimbursement coverage, accepting it as a standard of care, and being able to expand. You asked earlier, growth is going to come from them diving deeper and getting penetration in extremities, breast, head and neck, oral, building out the prostate business. And then I think over the long term, what's going to happen is they're going to find other therapeutic areas, which they find is going to be, other avenues, whether it's, orthopedic surgery around shoulders and knees. There's a host of additional therapeutic areas. As I said at the beginning, nerves run throughout your entire body that they can continue to expand into.
But to Augie's point, like they're doing 200 million in sales. Like if it gets delayed again or rejected or something, like those sales don't go away.
No, yeah, and that's a great follow-up question. Thank you for that. I don't think there's almost any risk that the revenue goes away. It's just having to go back to do more clinical work and having to wait to get additional reimbursement coverage. But the business as it is today, I think would continue to function as it is, and they continue to have pretty decent growth. Again, like the last several years, this thing has returned to kind of mid-teen, high-teen growth. And they would
How's
continue.
how's the balance sheet?
So the balance sheet right now is, and I think this has been an issue probably in the past, but I think the balance sheet now is looking in pretty good shape. So they have, I want to say like $35 million of cash, and then they have $50 million of debt, which is due in two different tranches in mid 27 and then in mid 28. But with their revenue growth and their EBITDA margins and profitability has been scaling even faster than top line growth. They're getting to the point where, in 24, there was the first time that they had positive EBITDA and positive free cash flow. They should probably hit, 5 to 10 million free cash flow this year. In 26, we think they can get to probably around 25 million in free cash flow. In 27, they can get to 40 million. So they are now at a place where they're self-sustainable. They do not require, and they built this new facility. All the CapEx for that is behind them. They have the capacity to grow 3x. They can get to, $600, $700, $800 million within their current facility, and they have add-on rights there. So, we think, the profitability and the free cash flow is going to just really ramp up over the next several years, and that they're going to be able to either refinance the debt if they want to or pay it off.
That's great. And in terms of risks to the thesis, outside of obviously like the rejection from the FDA, what else do you kind of worry about?
Yeah, I always worry about, anytime you're kind of replacing kind of a new or pre-existing kind of accepted, intervention, it takes time. It doesn't happen overnight. And they clearly have the data to show the efficacy. They're working a lot more. These are highly technical surgeons, and so they're doing a lot in terms of training them and building out market awareness. But that just takes time sometime. I think one thing that, and the new management team has also talked about doing this is, in medical device, you have efficacy and you have ease of use. And sometimes, they're both really important. And so ease of use, part of that is getting, is it easy to get reimbursed? Because if it's not, I'm not going to deal with it. And so they're clearly working on that. And then from an R&D standpoint, they're constantly working on, how do we make this surgery easier? And how do we train
The
our surgeons?
facility that they've built, is that kind of like what are they making in that facility? Is that where they're sourcing the cadaver stuff and are they packaging it in a certain way and then it's sent over to a hospital for a surgeon to use? Like, what are they actually doing in there?
Yeah, I mean, they don't so they use a variety of kind of, nonprofit, tissue companies that it's well known within the industry to source kind of
Yeah.
the nerves. And then they bring them into the facility in Dayton, Ohio. And it's going to get really scientific. And I don't even understand all of it. I always have to double check it. But they're essentially, they're cleaning out any kind of like cellular and non-cellular debris while also maintaining, the microarchitecture that exists with perineums, laminin, axonals within the nerve structure. So you think about a nerve, and the best way to think about it is if you take a fiber optic cable and you just cut it, and it's a cross section. And so you have one big nerve, and then you have all these little tiny bundles that are kind of going through it. That's the best way to think about a nerve. And so they're preserving kind of all the kind of scaffolding and architecture that allows those axons to reconnect. So they're taking those, they're cleaning out, they're processing it, they freeze them, and then they ship them off to the surgical sites, the hospitals, the ASCs, and stuff like that.
Super interesting. And so how many doctors do you think they have trained to actually use this stuff and put it, into an actual patient?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So like the previous management team had estimated like their call points as being, roughly 5,000 plus doctors, and those were 5,000 plus accounts, and then you could have multiple doctors within there. I don't have the exact number. What I would say though is like they train 75 to 80% of hand fellows. So plastic hand surgeons, orthopedic hand surgeons, neurosurgeons. They train 75 to 80% of these specialists.
So what would like a hypothetical, let's say you sever a nerve in your finger and it's like it can't grow back, so you need this allograft or whatever they call it. What would that procedure cost?
So it, obviously it's going to depend on the length and the number of nerves you need. But Medicare reimbursement for the procedure, and it's not, the Medicare covers the entire procedure, is $6,000 or $7,000, and then I think there's an add-on patient fee of around $800 or $900. And it's a great question, and that's the other thing that management over the last 5 years has done a great job of is Medicare reimbursement. I think has increased roughly 10% over the last 4 or 5 years, but these are also done in ASCs, so ambulatory surgery centers. And for a long time, they didn't have very good reimbursement at the ASCs. Well, that reimbursement rate has increased 140% over the last 5 years. So now it's on par. Whereas before, a lot of the ASCs, it was unprofitable for them to do the surgery. That's no longer the case.
Super interesting. Well, this is great, guys. I mean,
yeah, if I could just jump in, though, I think the one thing that really gets us excited, not only about the stock and about the company, but also about how many patients we can reach with this technology, is going back to our investment strategy. Is what could a Stryker or what could a Johnson & Johnson or what could a larger health med device company who already has a distribution network with all these hospitals in place, what could they do with this technology? And when we think about the FDA approval that they're hopefully going to get here in the next 3 months, we really think that book of business that they've already built, the technology that they have, and now the exclusivity they'll have with with the FDA approval, this will be a fantastic tuck-in acquisition for one of the larger players in the space. Our personal belief is that many of them are waiting for this FDA approval to get done because they don't want to take on the risk of however low it may be. Back in the private equity world, we just call it insurance. You just can't take certain risks if you're going to do a big deal. But as we think about multiples and valuation, these med device buyers have been very aggressive when they find technology that they like, and we think that this company is on the short list of a lot of these the larger
Yeah,
acquirers in the
I mean, it
space.
sounds like if they get approval, this bumps to like 10x revenue for a strategic or higher. I mean, I don't know. It wouldn't be that hard to get to a
Yeah,
double.
I mean, there's certainly precedents that high. I'm not going to underwrite quite to like to that level, but for sure, like high single digit revenue multiple it would be, I think, very easy given kind of the TAM, the exclusivity, the ability to kind of continue growing and self-fund. They don't have to throw in a bunch of money after acquiring. So
Yeah. I think that's a great way to end it, guys. This was great, super interesting. I mean, obviously, like what they actually do fundamentally is exciting, and if I ever cut my hand off, this will be on my mind.
Please don't.
yeah, please don't. Yeah, hopefully. I mean,
I know a bunch of guys who've had this like in construction where they've like lost a finger or something like that. Maybe had they known about something like this, they would have been in a better spot. But
for sure.
really, I mean, they're doing a really great thing, just in terms of the service itself. But the stock is also very interesting. So thanks for putting this together and talking about it with the SumZero community, and we'll certainly track the name and as I said earlier, looking forward to seeing future contributions from you guys.
Yeah, looking forward to it. Thank you so much for the platform, so much for hosting us today, and to everyone out there. If there's additional follow-up questions, feel free to reach out.
All righty, thanks, guys.
Okay, thank you so much.